Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight, there are breaking developments at this hour in the Jussie Smollett hate hoax case, a story that goes on and on and on. As of moments ago, 16 additional felony charges. What does that mean? It means Jussie Smollett could go to jail. We'll have the latest on that in a minute. But first, tonight, let's say you disagree with the political views of the people who run the country, the billionaire class, the Tesla drivers, our self-appointed clergy on social media, the retired prosecutors and spy chiefs you so often see on television opining about things. If you're watching this show, you're probably not all that impressed by these people. You don't wish them personal harm, of course. Some of them are well-meaning people. But you don't think they've done a very good job for America, though somehow they themselves are richer than ever. You might have voted for Donald Trump to make that very point. Have you ever considered what these people think of you for voting the way that you did, for daring to be insolent and disobedient? How would they punish you if they ever got the chance? Ever think of that? Well, wonder no more. Yesterday, Paul Manafort received 4 years in prison for bank fraud and tax evasion. Manafort will be 70 years old in a couple of weeks. He's got no criminal record of any kind. His sentence is considerably longer than the national average for the charges that he pled to. By the time Manafort gets out of prison, he will be elderly, broke, and disgraced. But for our ruling class, that's not nearly enough punishment. Manafort briefly managed Donald Trump's presidential campaign, and for that, they believe he must die in prison. Anything less cannot be allowed.
Shocking news.
Shocking. And I'll tell you, as a former prosecutor, I'm embarrassed. As an American, I'm upset.
From the very beginning, this judge seemed to have had a hard-on for just the Mueller probe overall.
It's a serious crime, and he got a slap on the wrist. And I think for that, people should be outraged.
I find this jaw-dropping, really.
Really? That's surprising.
It's an extraordinarily lenient sentence in light of the extent and scope of Mr. Manafort's criminality.
Paul Manafort got the special, clubby, Washington elite friendly treatment.
It's an outrage, and it's disrespectful of the American people.
Paul Manafort must die. That's what they're demanding. Robert Mueller agrees with them. Mueller asked that Manafort receive up to 24 years in prison. For perspective, that is more than twice what the average murderer in this country spends behind bars. That's a death sentence. Keep in mind that serial murderer Al Capone only got 11 years for crimes similar to those that Manafort's been charged with. But Capone was just a gangster. Paul Manafort is an enemy of the Democratic Party, and that's much worse. Is there a single person in America who believes that Manafort would be going to jail if he hadn't run Donald Trump's presidential campaign? Everyone in Washington knows that. There are a lot of Republican consultants here who are grateful tonight that they didn't take the job. They're heading out on spring break tomorrow. Manafort is heading to prison. The judge in the case clearly understands what's happening here. As he passed down his sentence, Judge T.S. Ellis reminded those watching that Manafort was, quote, not before this court for having anything to do with collusion with the Russian government to influence this election. That's literally true. Manafort has not been charged with any crime related to Russian collusion. Nobody has been charged with a crime related to Russian collusion. That's a fact. It's not an opinion. There's no dispute about it. And yet somehow a lot of people are still out there lying about this, probably because no one in the press ever calls them on it. Watch your elected officials say something totally untrue in the most self-righteous possible way.
The American people would be justified in feeling that there has been some miscarriage of justice here. What Paul Manafort did was essentially potentially threaten our very democracy, the principles of our democracy.
This news came out about Paul Manafort, and I'm really ticked off about this.
Were you shocked that he only got 47 months?
This criminal justice system can't surprise me anymore.
It's a sentence that is far too short. You know, I think I spent more days in detention in high school than Judge Ellis thinks that Paul Manafort should spend in jail.
So Cory Booker is, quote, very ticked off that Paul Manafort may not die in jail for cheating on his taxes. Keep in mind, this is the same Cory Booker who recently has spent hours on the Senate floor wagging his finger in the face of America over mass incarceration and our broken justice system. The same Cory Booker who worked so hard to reduce the sentences for fentanyl dealers and applauded when the bill passed. Yet that's also the same Cory Booker who now is outraged that a tax cheat isn't getting the death penalty. Has Cory Booker ever cheated on his taxes? Hope not. That'd be hypocrisy. It'd be interesting to know. It would be interesting to know if any of these hyenas circling Paul Manafort has ever fudged a deduction or somehow violated our complex banking laws. Somebody should check. The penalty's pretty high these days. Just kidding. This isn't about taxes, obviously. Cory Booker knows that well. It's about using power to crush your political opponents in order to get more power. The same principle will be on display next week when Manafort is sentenced for failing to register under the Foreign Agent Registration Act of 1938. That will be an amazing moment, if only because of how rarely it occurs. It's like Haley's Comet here in Washington. In the space of 50 years between 1966 and 2015, the DOJ charged a total of 7 people in FARA cases. Just 3 of them were convicted. Meanwhile, the most powerful foreign lobbies in Washington still are not registered under FARA. Robert Mueller has no plans to indict them. Of course not. They never made the mistake of running Donald Trump's presidential campaign. Chris Hahn is a radio host and former staffer for Senator Chuck Schumer. He joins us tonight. So, Chris, the sentence that the Mueller investigation recommended to the judge was up to 24 years. That's twice what the average convicted murderer spends in prison in this country for tax evasion. Is that an appropriate request, would you say?
Well, they didn't actually make a request. Those were the sentencing guidelines set by the court.
No, that's
set by
not.
The federal
You're
judiciary.
factually incorrect. That's not true. They did.
They made no recommendation for sentencing in
this
case. Yes, they requested that the guidelines be followed. They didn't make a specific recommendation of actual sentencing.
I mean, honest question. Do you think that Paul Manafort, who was pled to bank fraud, and he didn't defraud money from, he didn't steal any money from a bank. He misrepresented a loan application. No bank got actually fleeced by Paul Manafort, and he cheated on his taxes, as like a lot of people here do, as you know. Do you think getting twice the sentence of your average convicted murderer, is that appropriate? Would you feel better about America if he'd gotten that?
No. And Tucker, you and I have had many conversations about criminal justice. I never root for anyone who hasn't committed a violent felony to go to jail for any amount of time. But when there are guidelines, and this particular judge sentenced Congressman Jefferson to 12 years for bribery, charges that were later thrown out by the Supreme Court of the United States of America, you would think that he would follow the guidelines at least a little bit.
So what are you with the ghouls on MSNBC and CNN and the U.S. Congress who are shocked that he's not going to die in prison? I mean, he may. He's going to be 70 in 2 weeks. He could die in prison.
Look,
what's your position?
There's still another round of sentencing for him. I think that Paul Manafort was working for some pretty bad people. And I think that Paul Manafort was the connection to Russia in this last campaign. I don't know. I don't have any formal proof of that, but I do believe
working for some pretty bad people. Working for some pretty bad people. Okay, so I guess I've just been here too long to take that seriously. So you have Michael Cohen, whose lawyer, actually, I'll say it, his lawyer's a friend of mine. His lawyer represented the government of Pakistan, which supported the Taliban during 9/11. Are those some pretty bad people? Should he go to jail for that? Should we bust him on a FARA registration?
I think that he spent a lot of time advising people who wanted to bring more Russian control to the Ukraine on how
so what about people who lobbied for Pakistan? Just wondering, since we're all very judgmental now, people who lobby for Pakistan, and there are a lot of them, most of them are Democrats, as you well know. Pakistan supported the Taliban during 9/11. They had a direct line to Kandahar, the ISI. People who lobbied for that, should they go to jail?
I don't see any evidence of those people then running a campaign while Pakistan was interfering with our election, which Russia clearly was in 2016.
But he hasn't been charged with that.
And I hear a lot of I hear a lot of gnashing of teeth on the right about people reacting here. I hope when Jussie Smollett gets sentenced, people are saying, "Oh my God, that was too much," because he only hurt himself. If Jussie Smollett is looking at life in prison for lying, I will be the first one to say this is not a police state. Okay. So he's being charged with 16 felonies. So let's hope everybody is saying he should get a light sentence too. I don't
know what the guidelines are. I don't think he should get more than a fentanyl dealer. But the phoniest person in Washington is the senator from New Jersey, as you know. Totally fraudulent human being, Cory Booker. Cory Booker just got on the Senate floor hour after hour telling us that we're racist for putting fentanyl dealers in prison and we need to have their sentences. He sponsored that bill. Now he's telling us that Paul Manafort needs to spend the rest of his life in prison for tax evasion. Do you see any kind of disconnect between those two positions?
Look, I think the disconnect is how this particular judge sentenced a congressman who happened to be black to 12 years for a financial crime.
Are you calling the judge a racist?
But this guy lived an exemplary life, he says. and except for the lying he's done for the last 10 years.
Wait, hold on. What are you saying? Are
he's
you
only
saying
going to get 4 years.
I'm confused. Are you saying that Bill Jefferson wasn't guilty of keeping cash in his freezer? Are you saying that T.S. Ellis is a racist?
I say that the Supreme Court
I guess
threw out.
Dr. Seuss is a racist too.
I
Who's
see
not
that
a
the
racist?
Supreme Court threw out
okay.
most of this. I see that the Supreme Court threw out most of those charges and
I'm not here.
and
I knew
got
Bill
rid of
Jefferson. I
most
liked
of the
Bill
sentence.
Jefferson. I'm not here to attack Bill Jefferson.
Right.
I'm just asking what you're saying.
What I'm saying is that this judge seems to be stricter on Bill Jefferson than he was with Manafort. And there were guidelines in place. He completely ignored it. There's the difference between God and a federal district court judge.
Okay, so
is
you
God
think,
doesn't think
so
he's a federal district court judge.
Your position is that for tax evasion, Paul Manafort ought to have spent the rest of his life in prison, 24 years. I just hope that nobody else has cheated on his taxes. And you know what I really hope is that nobody else has failed to register under FARA in this city. Can you think of anyone who hasn't registered under FARA?
That's not what I'm saying
you know anyone?
at all. What I'm saying, look, I don't want anybody to go to jail for a long period of time over financial crimes. But if there are going to be standards, they should be applied equally. And clearly, Paul Manafort got better than equal treatment
let's do a quick
by
check
Judge
on
Ellis.
everybody's taxes and everybody's FARA registration. And like half the people I know will be doing life.
I hope later on in the show, when people are talking about Jussie Smollett, they remember this conversation and call for leniency.
It'll be interesting. Okay, thank you, Chris. Good to see you. So we talk a lot about prison. All the dumb people on TV think it's no big deal. Go to prison. Yeah, whatever. Die there. You're on the other side. You deserve it. But you never hear from anyone who's been in federal prison. And one thing about people who have been in federal prison, they tend to be for prison reform because it's bad. Bernie Kerik is one of them. He's a former NYPD commissioner, author of the book From Jailer to Jailed, and he joins us tonight. Quick question for you, Bernie Kerik, is you see people blithely recommend that so-and-so do the rest of his life in prison. What's your reaction to someone who's been there?
Honestly, it makes me sick, especially Cory Booker. I've worked with Senator Booker for the last 5 years on trying to get these bills passed. And at every meeting, everything we've done, first time, nonviolent offenders should not go to prison for life, should not go to prison for extended time. We should look at alternative sentencing. And then to hear him talk today, like Paul Manafort should go to prison for the 19 to 24 years or whatever the recommendation was, it's BS. It's completely hypocritical, and it just makes me sick.
So you hear people say, and we'll just be honest, I mean, most people you see on TV are dumb. You know, that's why they're not in finance. So they don't know. But you do know. And when you hear them say, it's club fed, whatever, it's easy, you're basically going to be golfing the whole time. Is that true?
Here's the only people that thinks that a minimum security camp where Paul Manafort should go, may go, the only people that believes that are people that's been in the system and are institutionalized, and they've been there for 15, 20, 25, 30, 40 years. Those people think that a minimum security camp is club fed because they've been turned into monsters. But when you take a law-abiding citizen, a 70-year-old man, and you stick him in a minimum security camp where the noise is atrocious, where there's filth, where you have to live on a daily basis and worry about MRSA and staph infection and HIV, and you live out of a Tupperware dish, and you live in a cubicle that's made for 2 people, and there's 5 guys in there, and you have the deprivation of freedom, which is so profound that you can't even imagine it, and you don't get to see your kids, you don't get to see your grandkids, and if you don't have money, you can't survive because you can't talk to anybody on the outside. Don't tell me that a minimum security camp is a country club or club fed because you have no idea what you're talking about, you're delusional, or you're just plain stupid.
How do you feel as someone who's over 40, watching your country become a place where people openly call for the imprisonment of their political opponents because they're their political opponents?
You know what, Tucker, I wrote about this today. There's an article in Newsmax, and it's basically, it's all about Nadler sending out 81 letters. He's going to torment and torture and bankrupt 81 people for political reasons, selective and political reasons. It's got to stop. Somebody has to do something to stop this. They're bankrupting people. They're destroying people's lives. They're crucifying people, families, kids. It's just sickening.
It is sickening. I agree with that completely. Bernie Kerik, thank you very much for your perspective on that.
Thank you.
We have Fox News alert for you. Actor Jussie Smollett has been charged with more than a dozen additional felonies stemming from his fake hate crime last January. This January, Trace Gallagher has the very latest on this and joins us now. Trace?
Hi, Tucker. He went from 1 felony count of disorderly conduct to 16 felony counts. And to make matters legally worse for Jussie Smollett, the grand jury also returned 2 sets of charges because they say he gave false statements to 2 different Chicago police officers, and the stories were different, telling police about the racist and homophobic slurs, the suspects yelling, "This is MAGA country," and saying they beat him up, put a noose around his neck, and poured bleach on him. Each set of charges carries a penalty up to 4 years in prison. Now, experts say it's highly unlikely he'll serve 8 years, but it's more likely now that he could serve some jail time, though a plea deal is also a strong possibility. Police say Smollett paid 2 brothers $3,500 to stage the attack, and they say the brothers did strike Jussie Smollett, but the scratches and bruises on the actor's face were likely self-inflicted. Jussie Smollett could also face federal charges for mail fraud. Investigators believe before the alleged attack, he sent himself a threatening letter with white powder that turned out to be Tylenol. The letter is now at an FBI crime lab. So far, no word from the 36-year-old actor or his lawyers about these counts. Tucker.
Really an amazing story. Trace, thanks so much. We've got new information coming in at this hour on the Smollett case. We're going to have a reaction from Roy Murdoch of National Review and more. That's straight ahead.
I still want to believe, with everything that has happened, that there's something called justice. Because if I stop believing that, then what's it all for? Thank you, Jussie.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jussie. That's my new ringtone. Can't get enough. I'm not going to forget that. You shouldn't either. A month ago, Jussie Smollett stood at the very apex of America's social hierarchy. He was a victim. Now, a grand jury has charged Jussie Smollett with 16 felonies. The indictment accuses Smollett of repeatedly lying to police officers in a deliberate effort to fabricate a hate crime against himself. Those are the facts as we know them. What do they mean? Roy Murdoch is a contributing editor at National Review, and he joins us tonight. Roy, thanks a lot for coming on.
Tucker, how are you?
So I would say you're an expert at taking 3 steps back and assessing the meaning of news events. What's the meaning of this one?
Well, I think we have the presumption of innocence on the part of Jussie Smollett, but beyond that, it looks to me, the evidence seems rather overwhelming with this check we just saw and all else, that he's got a couple major problems. One is illegality, filing a false police report. People have done this in the past, for example, the UVA rape case, the Duke Lacrosse rape case, quote unquote. And there really were no consequences suffered by the people who went to the police and lied to them about events that didn't take place. I think if Smollett, in fact, is convicted, it will send the message, a badly needed message, that if you lie to the police about events that didn't take place, that's very serious, especially in a city like Chicago with a massive crime problem with homicides. You've got police who ought to be finding murderers who were sidelined to work on this fake case. So that's very serious. And then there's a very serious moral problem here, which is in a country that's completely divided with all of us at each other's throats, the last thing we need is one more reason for us to try to strangle each other. And when this whole thing happened a few weeks ago, you had a case involving a black man who's also gay, which made it a racial case, a sexual case. And of course, he blamed it on people who supposedly said, this is MAGA country, which turned it into basically a war on Trump supporters. So the last thing we need in this country right now is people adding to the tension and division that we're suffering already. And I think this is why this man has done something very immoral as well as illegal. And he ought to spend several years in jail breaking rocks as a consequence.
So your final point is the one that really resonates with me. As you put it, we already are at each other's throats. We don't need more reasons to be.
Absolutely.
Why do you think so many of our opinion makers in the media and on social media are encouraging that division?
Well, unfortunately, this is something the left has pushed. I mean, they've pushed racial division for years. I mean, going back to the slave days through Jim Crow and on, identity politics, not looking at us as individuals with whatever talents or shortcomings we may have, but instead by putting us into competing racial camps, sexual orientation camps, and so on, and letting this sort of tension and and acrimony continue. And here we have this actor who gets paid $65,000 per episode inculcating or perpetrating this sort of thing, supposedly so he could get a raise and make more than $65,000 a week working on Empire, which works out, if you do 20 episodes, about $1.3 million, which I think is a pretty comfortable wage, but I guess he didn't like that. And fortunately, he got caught. If he didn't get caught, he would still be considered a victim. He probably would have gone to the Oscars and would have been applauded by all the elite in Hollywood as this black gay man who suffered the most horrible consequences. GQ magazine had a headline about this. It was, "The racist, homophobic attack on Jussie Smollett is far-right America's endgame." And this is the narrative that existed. Fortunately, the police got to the bottom of this, and this whole thing unraveled, or it would still be menacing this country.
It's so sad to see what's happened to American magazines. I spent years working in them. Only the losers remain. Depressing. And very quick, last question. Am I making this up, or is there a theme here that the people who claim to be victims tend to be the more powerful in our society? I can't remember the last time I saw an HVAC repairman or someone on unemployment benefits claiming to be the victim of something. It's always the powerful who claim to be victims.
Very often, it's people who are, in elite schools, people in elite institutions, what have you, who claim to be victims. And rather than celebrate the victors in the society, we seem to be celebrating the victims. It's a very, very sad situation.
Yes.
And Jussie Smollett took a sad song and made it worse, which, of course, is the opposite of what John Lennon encouraged us to do.
Troy Murdoch, great to see you.
Tucker, great to see you.
Well, according to a lot of polls, Joe Biden, who's run a number of times for president, is the favorite once again for the Democratic presidential nomination, should he choose to run. But who is Joe Biden, actually? How much do you know about him? You'll know more after the next segment. Joe Biden isn't officially running for president once again yet. He's bombing around the country, getting rich from speeches to corporate groups around the world, really. But if he does enter the race, polls show he'll immediately be a frontrunner for the Democratic nomination. Joe Biden has been in politics for a long, long, long time. The Democratic Party of today is completely different from the party he joined 50 years ago. How will the party's red guards, who are now in charge of everything, feel about Joe Biden's past? Lisa Booth has been digging into this. She's a senior fellow at Independent Women's Voice, and she joins us tonight with the results of her Joe Biden investigation.
Tucker.
Hey,
yeah.
Lisa.
Well, there's a lot there, as you can imagine. He served in the Senate for 36 years, spent 8 years as the vice president. And with that, there's a lot of positives. Part of the reason why he's the front runner is high name ID. You are more easily able to raise money when people know you like that, and you have a lot of base of support among the donor base. But there's also a lot of challenges. There's a lot of things that you have said that you're going to have to answer to, things that you have to vote on as well. And Joe Biden has recently come under criticism, one for his treatment of Anita Hill during the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings. A lot of Democrats felt that he was too tough on her and negatively impacted Anita Hill. And also, remember how much trouble Hillary Clinton gotten over her super predator comment and how that impacted her 2016 presidential run? There were interactions with the Black Lives Matter protesters who interrupted a fundraiser, demanded an apology for that comment. Well, Joe Biden had a similar comment that he might have to answer to as well. Listen to this.
That cadre of young people, tens of thousands of them, born out of wedlock, without parents, without supervision, without any structure, without any conscience. We should focus on them now, not out of a liberal instinct for love, brother, and humanity, although I think that's a good instinct, but for simple, pragmatic reasons. If we don't, they will, or a portion of them will, become the predators 15 years from now. And, Madam President, we have predators on our streets.
Well, and Tucker, remember of the 4.4 million voters, 2012 Obama voters that sat home in 2016, more than a third were African Americans. And there's also this comment, when you look at the fact that you've got people like Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren embracing and endorsing reparations for slavery, there's this comment I want to show you as well, if we can pull it up, that Biden made back in 1975 regarding school busing. And he said, I do not buy the concept popular in the 60s, which said we have suppressed the black man for 300 years, and the white man is now far ahead ahead in the race for everything our society offers. In order to even the score, we must now give the black man a head start or even hold the white man back to even the race. I don't buy that. So a lot of these comments he has previously made could end up being an issue both with African-American voters and just where the Democratic Party is now as a whole. I mean, we know that the party has gone increasingly leftward leaning. Medicare for All used to be outside of the mainstream. Now it's a litmus test for Democratic candidates. So Joe Biden may not be in the mainstream of the Democratic Party anymore.
I would say he's not even the same zip code as the mainstream of his party. At least
Well,
great to see you
that's a
tonight.
more interesting way to say it.
It's true. It's unbelievable. Thanks a lot for that.
Happy Friday.
Well, the Russia story has completely and utterly warped the Democratic Party in the last 2 years. It's driven them, many of them anyway, to become pro-war, pro-censorship, pro-China, pro-CIA, and a bunch of other things that would have horrified them just 10 years ago. Stephen Cohen knows a lot about this. He's been at the heart of Russia studies and politics for a long time. Obviously, a very famous Russian studies professor at Princeton and NYU and a contributing editor to The Nation magazine. He joins us tonight. Professor, thanks very much for coming on. So you've been around American politics and Russian diplomacy for decades. How has this story, the Russia collusion story, changed the Democratic Party, would you say?
Yeah, some people think I've been around too long. And I'm working on that. Look, as a historian, I know that parties have parties within them. They're divided. And I saw that when I was growing up in the segregated South. My father was a Franklin Delano Roosevelt Democrat for social justice, yet the Democratic Party was a segregationist party in the South.
Right.
We see something like that going on today, I fear. That is to say that the party and its candidates for the presidency are preaching social justice and economic justice and traditional liberal values, but they're pushing this Russiagate story against Trump in a way that I think is making the Democratic Party the party of Cold War with Russia, which easily could be hot war, the party of neo-McCarthyism, and a party that doesn't care the way it used to about civil liberties. You made the point at the top of your broadcast, I think, about Paul Manafort. It seems to be a party that wants a death sentence for artful tax returns. That would put an awful lot of people in prison.
And Russia seems to be the unifying force behind all of these changes. I mean, you're seeing censorship online that liberals of my childhood would have rebelled against, fought against, filed lawsuits against, that they now support because it's done in the name of eliminating Russian disinformation.
Yeah, I have a different way of formulating it. In the 20th century, we had three major episodes of détente with Russia, or what President Trump has called cooperation. They were all done by, I don't know if you have thought of this, by Republican presidents. Eisenhower, Nixon, and Reagan, correct?
Yes.
In that sense, Trump, in calling for cooperation or détente with Russia, is squarely in the Republican tradition. I don't know if Trump knows that himself, but he is. And yet when he does what every Republican president did in the 20th century, try to cooperate with Moscow, it's called treason. And I'm not making this up. You remember in July last year, he went to Helsinki for a summit with Putin, the Russian leader.
Yeah.
Something that every American president since Eisenhower had done, had a summit with the Kremlin leader. And what did they say when he came home? Trump came home. Treason. So, driven by the Democrats. So, I mean, to my mind, though I've been a kind of Democrat most of my life, the Democrats are becoming the party of anti-national security.
It must be so bewildering. It's bewildering for me, and I know only a fraction of what you know.
Well, what zip code are you in? I'm not sure.
I'm in a very faraway zip code.
Do we
at
have
this
zip
point.
codes
I'm not even
anymore?
sure. I don't think we have cell service in my zip code, actually. That's how far out I am. Professor,
you.
great to see you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Big tech has become a critical part of the left's censorship agenda, really the engine of it. Does that problem have a simple fix, or is it time to break up the tech giants entirely? That's a rhetorical question. You know the answer, but we have more on it next. Most of the Democratic Party is happily aligned with the interests of big tech, which funds their campaign. But there is one exception, at least Elizabeth Warren, believe it or not. Today, Warren unveiled a plan to break up the country's largest tech monopolies, Google, Amazon, Facebook, if she's elected president. Nobody's ever accused the show of carrying water for Elizabeth Warren, that's for sure. But when somebody says something smart and true, we want to be the first to congratulate that person. We are not partisans. We're just looking for people of good faith to make good decisions. And that would be a good decision. One of the main reasons it would be is because monopolies have immense power. And these monopolies use that power to censor unpopular speech, conservative speech almost always. A Twitter executive recently appeared on the Joe Rogan podcast and basically admitted that. Watch.
Your platform restricts speech.
Our platform promotes speech unless people violate our rules.
You're biased and you're targeting specific individuals because your rules support this perspective.
No.
Why are people being suspended for tweeting #LearnToCode?
Some of these tweets actually contained death threats, wishes of harm, other coded language that we've seen to mean death to journalists. So it wasn't about just the learn to code. It was about the context that we were seeing.
Come on, that's just not true. That's just not true. The editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller was suspended for tweeting nothing but #LearnToCode.
She's just lying. They all are. Jesse Kelly is the host of the Jesse Kelly Radio Show in Houston. He has himself been a victim of tech censorship, and we're proud to have him on tonight. Jesse, thanks very much for coming on. So what strikes you more, the willingness of Twitter and other social media companies to just censor things they don't like, or their complete lack of self-awareness when asked about it?
I think they're extremely self-aware, Tucker. They're aware of the fact that other than that interview right there and people like your show, nobody's going to ask them the tough questions. And I'm not surprised about them censoring. That's what totalitarians do. They censor things off. And we as conservatives had better wake up to the fact that we have a cultural war with socialism in the United States of America right now, and the socialists control all the supply lines, and conservatives wonder why we're starving to death.
That's exactly right. And I should say, I think I don't know the guy who asked the question. I think it's Tim Pool, and I think he's a leftist, but an honest one, and good for him. But you're absolutely right that they're never pressed on this by anybody except in the most sort of sensitive way. Robin Roberts interviewing Jussie Smollett kind of why are you so wonderful way. And that confuses me because journalists have everything at stake in the First Amendment. They should be opposed to censorship. They usually have been. Why are they no longer opposed to it?
Because journalists want to be eaten last. All the journalists are socialists, just like the tech guys are, just like all the media is, just like Hollywood is. All the journalists just want to be aligned with the socialists that are in charge of the government at the end. But conservatives had better wake up, and they'd better realize that making your living just off these tech platforms is dangerous. It spells trouble. It's like inviting Ilhan Omar to your kid's bar mitzvah.
I mean, if only conservatives controlled a branch of government or a chamber of Congress, maybe someone would do something about it. I mean, why aren't the conservative office holders who wield power doing anything to protect their voters and America and the Bill of Rights itself?
Well, Tucker, they should. They should be treating these tech companies like publishers. They are publishers. They censor out conservatives. They only censor out conservatives. And they've never censored out liberals off there, so they should change their tax status. And that's what these tech companies are most scared of. But then again, you and I both know Congress is going to screw that up, too. Congress can't do anything right. Congress couldn't sell cat litter at an event for feminists.
I'm not allowed to laugh at that, so I'm not. I'm just going to nod like I don't even understand what you're saying. Okay, so if Elizabeth Warren comes out, who I don't think I haven't made a lifetime habit of complimenting, if she comes out and says, let's break up the tech companies, let's get this under control, why wouldn't Republicans ally with her in that one thing?
Because I think if you give Elizabeth Warren that kind of power, what's she going to grab next? Yeah, it sounds nice to break up Amazon and Google and these things that frankly, they scare me too, how big and powerful they are. And I know they scare you. But once you give Elizabeth Warren that kind of power, then that hungry animal's not going to stop there. She's going to start looking at people like you and me, and you know we're going to get eaten next.
You're going to break up your house. You know, it's probably a fair point. You're a wise man. Jesse, great to see you. Thank you.
Appreciate you, brother.
Well, you thought typhus was gone. It was a 19th century disease, a disease of poverty and filth. And you're sort of right and you're sort of wrong. It's making a comeback in Los Angeles. we hit the streets for our investigation. Madness in California. We've got it on tape. Also, Janice Dean, one of the great people at Fox News, joins us tonight in the Friend Zone with some great news to share. We'll be right back. Now to the slow-moving disaster known as California. Los Angeles has one of the largest homeless populations in the United States. Local officials have done virtually nothing to fix the situation. As a result, diseases you used to read about in novels are making a comeback in this supposedly developed country. Diseases like typhus. Hillary Vaughn went to Los Angeles to investigate this for the show, and here's what she found.
In the heart of Los Angeles, rats are breeding, and a medieval disease is born again. Typhus.
These medieval diseases are here now because this environment got out of control.
Typhus is popping up in LA's Skid Row, an area where homelessness sprawls across 50 city blocks. And an infectious disease eradicated in the 1800s that festers in filth and is spread by fleas and rats is back. Because the city allows hundreds of homeless people to set up shacks on the sidewalk and live there forever.
Sometimes they have duplexes, all kinds, 3 stories. They have furniture. One lady had like a little rubber jacuzzi in here one time. They get real comfortable here.
Officer Dion Joseph has spent over 2 decades on Skid Row.
It's a mess everywhere now.
He says letting tent cities thrive isn't protecting the poor, it's proliferating drugs and disease.
We have some people right in this row here who have housing, but they'll set up a tent and pretend to be homeless all day and sell drugs. Spice, methamphetamine, crack cocaine.
We have drug addicts, drug dealers, thugs who are preying on our most vulnerable.
Councilmember Joe Boscaino, also a former police officer, led an effort to pass a city ordinance that let homeless people pop tents on the street to sleep at night, but had them pack up in the morning to keep streets clear. But the court blocked it from being enforced after advocates representing a group of homeless people sued the city, calling its enforcement cruel and unusual punishment.
Our police officers are not able to do their job and clear our public sidewalks. It's insanity. They are not allowing us to clean our streets and our sidewalks. What they are doing is they are embracing and encouraging a lifestyle of filth.
Over time, squalor built up on the streets with rats feasting on rotting food mixed with sewage and used syringes. But far away from Skid Row, through rats and fleas, typhus traveled through the streets, and a deputy city attorney who works way up on the 6th floor at City Hall got infected.
I felt like I was going to die.
Greenwood says the building has always had rats, but what's changed isn't what's in the building, it's what's around it.
The homeless population has moved closer and closer. They surround the building. So as folks walk to work and back, they're walking through rotting food, raw sewage.
They're going to stay right here and surround themselves with filth that's only going to lead them to demise.
Hillary Vaughn joins us. Hillary, that's dirtier than downtown Mumbai, India, where I just was. Were you surprised by it?
I was surprised, and I actually threw away my shoes after walking through the streets because I didn't trust that I could clean them effectively to make sure I didn't get, any form of typhus if a flea hitched a ride on my boots.
How could there be used hypodermic needles on the street and no one picks them up?
We saw some cleanup efforts, but a lot of the controversy is what they're allowed to throw away as trash. A lot of homeless people keep piles of things on the street, and you may think it's trash, but they get upset if you try to remove it.
Oh, homeless people get upset. Okay, that makes total sense. It's insane. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thanks.
Amazing package. Please continue to investigate for us. We've got great news. End of the week. We want to end on the happiest possible note. The Friend Zone is back. We welcome an actual friend from Fox News onto the program, Janice Dean, a beloved meteorologist, a co-host of Fox and Friends. She's a new memoir out, Mostly Sunny, and she joins us tonight. Janice, it is so great to see you.
I'm just glad to be in the same studio as you.
I love it. Mostly sunny.
We miss you.
You are the sunniest person I think we worked together for a long time. You're the sunniest person I think I've ever met.
But what about your wife?
She's pretty sunny.
She's very sunny.
So, but why wouldn't your memoir be entirely sunny?
I was going to call it partly sunny.
Partly sunny.
But, you know, I think it's all about your outlook. If
Yes.
you have a sunny outlook during challenging times, I think that truly can help you through life. And that's what I try to do. I try to find the silver lining. I think all of the bumps on the road that I've had, and I've had a few, I realize now they had to happen for me to have this moment sitting here with you, Tucker.
I love that. I love that you decided that and you stuck with it. That is, who are we looking at, Janice Dean?
That is me back home in Ottawa, Canada. I was a bylaw enforcement officer in uniform for about 2 weeks, trying to make it look cute there.
What bylaws did you enforce?
Bylaw is basically non-criminal laws. So barking dogs, long grass complaints, annoying dogs, cats not on their leash. We actually tried to leash cats at one point. Try that, my friends.
It's an orderly
So
country.
I was a dispatcher there, and I would dispatch calls. I did that every summer while I was in school, like bylaw base to 16, there's a dog on the loose. It was a 1069 or something like that. Bylaw base to 1069, we got a 1069 on the loose. So I did that for a while, and they tell me that I got my start in radio from dispatching those calls. And I did the actual uniform thing for about 2 weeks. I was terrible at it. There would be a dog like across the street that I was supposed to catch, and I would pretend that I didn't see it.
How long were you? I know that you know the name of every song written between 1960 and 2000. How long were you a disc jockey?
Well, on and off for probably 15 years.
Whoa.
Well, I would say, no, 10 years, because I've been at Fox for 15 years. My broadcasting career has been 25 years. So I started when I was about 23. I worked at a classic rock station, met all these cool rock stars. Which I document in Mostly Sunny. There I am. Shannon Bream and I were talking about, like, my hair was terrible back then, this sort of mushroom
No, it's
thing.
great, actually.
There's Billy Ray Cyrus, Achy Breaky Heart there.
When is that?
That was the 90s. But my big story was with Steven Tyler, and that's in the book. And you, Tucker Carlson, actually helped me get my autograph on the actual picture of Steven Tyler and I 20 years later. Do you know that story?
I don't know.
So you have to read the book, but here's Steven Tyler and I. We had a moment together back home in Ottawa. He never signed my picture until Fox and Friends a couple of years ago. We were playing Love in an Elevator. I said, I have this great moment with Steven Tyler, but I don't have an autograph.
Yes, I remember
And
this.
then on Twitter, somebody contacted me and said, send me the picture. I'll get Steven Tyler to sign it. He did. There it is, because of Tucker Carlson.
That is so cool.
Isn't that amazing?
Where was, and that was in Canada?
That was in Canada. Yeah, that was backstage. He wanted me to come backstage after the show, and then that would have changed the whole trajectory.
You know what? It's probably
of
best
my
that
life.
you didn't do that. We never would have met you if you'd done that. So, without getting too heavy on live TV, but we've talked about this a number of times. You decided that you were going to approach the challenges in your life in a positive way. People are inspired when they hear that. Can you give advice to other people who are facing challenges? How do you do that? How do you stick with it?
Well, I wrote this book for myself when I was diagnosed with MS, and that was almost 15 years ago, because I was looking for people that were doing well despite the challenge.
Yes.
And I couldn't find a lot of that. I needed a book like this, Mostly Sunny, to make me feel like I wasn't alone. So I wrote this book sort of for me 15 years ago when I was facing a really dark time. I just wanted to know there was somebody out there doing well.
Whatever you did, I've never met anyone who's approached life as you have, and I'm very impressed by it.
Well,
I mean that.
it also helps to have really good friends around you.
Yes.
And I consider you a very good friend.
Thank you.
And now I have my mug.
Your Eric Wempel mug.
I've been waiting for this mug. I won that contest, and you never gave me
I
the
know.
mug, and I had to come to D.C.
Because we're not allowed to send Eric through the U.S. mail. You had to come here and get it.
He's in my book, too.
I know.
Yeah.
I know he is. One of his relatives approached me in an airport and asked for one of those mugs. She feels about him the way we do.
I have it.
Janice
I love you,
Dean,
Tucker Carlson.
You're the best, Janice. Thank you.
Mwah.
What a great end to the week. We're done. We'll be back Monday, 8 p.m., the show that is the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. Have a truly happy and relaxing weekend with the people you love. Turn off the devices if you can, and we will see you Monday evening. Hannity is next from New York.